Hey everyone, we'll get started in just a moment. While folks are joining, feel free to say hi in the chat, let us know your name, where you're joining from, and your favorite fall treat. Thanks, Josh and Diane. I was just in Maine this past weekend and walking through the lakes was lovely, I agree. Pies and sauces. And if you're just joining us, we're putting our name, where we're tuning in from, and a favorite fall treat in the chat while some others log on. We'll get started in just a minute. Free, I grew up in Lancaster, and I agree, the applesauce is really good. All right, well, looks like the chats are slowing down a bit. The registrations are slowing down a bit. So I'll get us started a bit today. Excited to be with you all. I'm Nicole Reddig. I'm an apprenticeship expert looking at design and research for apprenticeships. And I'm thrilled to be moderating today's conversation on employer partnerships and apprenticeships, the playbook for any industry. So we're excited to have all of you here and to get to know you a bit more in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of good fall treats and people joining from all over the country. So throughout this kind of talk today, we hope to make it a bit interactive. And so we'll be doing some polls and things in the chat to help get to know each of you a bit more. So take a moment. There's going to be a poll that pops up on the screen. This will help our panelists know your role in this space to better be able to orient the conversation today. So you'll see a drop down for what role you play in the apprenticeship ecosystem. So take a second and answer that if you will. Awesome. Do we want to show the results? Looks great. It's a lot of intermediaries, it looks like, state apprenticeship agencies, some higher ed. Awesome. That's great to see so many wonderful partners in the space. And if you're in another role, would love to hear a bit more about that. If you're comfortable putting it in the chat at some point. All right. So before we dive in, just one quick housekeeping note. So feel free to drop any questions that you have in the Q&A box or the chat at any time during the session. So we'll be sure to answer as many of these as we can at the end of the session. Awesome. So to start things off, we're going to go over the goals for today's session. So first, we'll identify the essential roles that each partner plays in an apprenticeship program and how these roles intertwine to really build successful programs. Second, we'll discuss innovative strategies to build stakeholder collaborations and create buy-in amongst the partners. And third, we'll share some proven practices and tools to maintain strong partnerships to further your apprenticeship programs to success. So in the chat, like I said, we're going to be a little interactive. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you in your team with your apprenticeship program? What are some of your goals? And Chloe's going to drop some guides in the chat for the kind of stages that you might be at in your apprenticeship program. Take a second to allow folks to do that. Awesome, and great to see some of the other folks with philanthropy, apprenticeship advocates, technical assistants in the space as well. Awesome. So seeing a lot of exploring apprenticeship programs and a couple launching and expanding, that's really exciting. Glad to see so many of you here. And, I think the information provided will be a range of perspectives that support at different points in the program. So thanks for sharing all of that. So now I'd like to get started with introducing our panelists for today. I'll invite each of them one by one to briefly introduce themselves and share a bit of the work they're doing in their space. So first up is Amy Lesniak.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this panel today. I'm excited to talk about all things apprenticeship and partnerships. My background is in higher education. I was in the state university college system for over a decade, and then I transitioned into workforce where I was working for a training provider, and that's where I got introduced to registered apprenticeships. And then I went on to stand up programs in telecom, IT, trades, state, national levels. So what I do as an independent consultant now is I work with all size organizations from, we just heard about apprenticeship, what is it, to helping registration process, expanding your programs, program design, and then ongoing maintenance and compliance issues in the program.
Thanks, Amy. Great to have you here. Next up, we have Dr. Jen Thomas.
Hi, all. So similar background, I guess, to Amy, but what's interesting for me is I started my career as a guidance counselor in the K-12 system. So I was a guidance counselor in high school for a couple of years, then transitioned into higher ed, worked at a former community college that turned state college in the state of Florida, and earned my doctorate degree in higher education administration and policy, and then actually left higher ed and went into some consulting, worked in the IT field for some startups. And now I'm back working in higher ed, but in a different spin. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go throughout the webinar. But I work for Clark University, which is a college in Worcester, Massachusetts. I still live in Gainesville, Florida, and I was originally born and raised in Buffalo, New York. So I also have the kind of scope on the East Coast. And so again, we'll dive in a little bit more in terms of kind of that full circle of workforce and education and all things apprenticeship. Talk about a couple of Department of Labor grants and the individuals in which we serve in the role that I currently have for full time. So great to meet everybody. Welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. And finally, Dr. Bridget Wiley.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I come from a little bit of a different background than Jen and Amy. I actually worked clinically in healthcare for many, many years before I entered the workforce space, and currently work for the UW Health System, which is a 25,000 plus employee organization, academic medical setting. Started there as a professor in our medical imaging programs, and then founded a program for youth exploration into careers in healthcare that was very well received and took off like we didn't expect. So the HOPE program, Health Occupations and Professions Exploration Program, has served over 6,500 college and high school students in exploring careers in healthcare. Also has provided them with opportunities for summer internships, youth apprenticeships, and then we have a growing number of registered apprenticeship programs under my umbrella, including some of the first degreed healthcare registered apprenticeship programs in the country for registered nursing, surgical tech, and respiratory therapy. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bridget. So, like we have said in the chat, definitely have an all-star group today to learn from and learn with. We'd like to kick off today's session with exploring the why of what brings us together today. Why should employers join the table as a partner in registered apprenticeship programs? Why should you all, with your various organizations and agencies, partner with those employers? And as you can see from these statistics, the return on the investment for employers is evident, right? With 94% of apprentices retained in employment, and $25,000 employer direct benefit, as well as just overall return on investments of larger apprenticeship initiatives. So before we turn it over to our panelists, we want to hear from you all in the chat. Are you currently involved with a registered apprenticeship program, particularly for employers in the room? You can type Y for yes, no for not yet. And if you're not an employer, and I know many of you are partners, feel free to indicate if you're already partnering on a program, or a W for just would like to partner on a program and you're interested in pursuing next steps after today's session. Thanks, Chloe, for putting some of that in the chat. Awesome. So seeing quite a range of interests so far, but a lot of already partnering, which is great to see folks who have partners but are still in that exploration stage. Overall, fantastic. All right, so I'm going to pass it back over to our panelists now, starting with Jen. So we know that the tech industry is constantly evolving, and from your perspective, I'd love to know more about how registered apprenticeship programs became a solution for closing IT skill gaps.
Sure, yeah. And usually when I start talking about this, I have an audience that I interact with. I don't like speaking at people. I like talking with people. So even if we want to mention in the chat, if you're familiar with H-1B visas, or just thumbs up, give me a reaction. Let me know if you are, or if you're not. I'll explain what they are, just to kind of get a poll for where we're at. I can't even see the thumbs up. So if you guys can see the thumbs up, you let me know. Yay! All right, thanks, Ray. Or even in the reactions, I don't know if that's a thing. So what's really cool about H-1B visas is that they're work visas, right? So individuals from other countries, in order to come to the United States and work here, needs to be sponsored on an H-1B visa. I say all that to say the grants that Clark University won in this tech space came from this funding, right? Which is the funding that is accumulated over time from the employers that have paid into this system. So the interesting thing is that the United States government has decided, hey, wait, why are we not creating this talent pipeline here in the United States, specifically in the world of technology, which is where these 3 grants that Clark University has won comes into play. So I'll talk to you guys a little bit about the data, and then of course throughout the webinar we'll talk about the actual lives that we have impacted in this space. But specifically in the tech space, it's building this talent pipeline. And we've been able to do it through training opportunities and apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship opportunities, which has been really, really cool. So in the space of TechQuest, I'll talk about this. There's 3 different grants, like I said, in my space that we have been working on, again, through Clark. The interesting thing is that, right, Clark University is an institution of higher education, and the individuals that we actually serve are not students at Clark. They are participants all over the United States. Clark just happens to be the one that's implementing and leading kind of this charge. So when people ask me what I do, what's really fun is I let them know that I work in higher education, but my job is actually to build intentional relationships and to project manage these grants. And so TechQuest, just to give you guys the data, I'm sure if you're familiar with grants, you have metrics that you have to meet. And so you write the grant, you meet the metrics, you're good to go. And then hopefully you get another one. So that's what we've been doing. TechQuest was our first grant. It started in 2019. The really great thing is that we wrote it, and this was before I was on board, thinking that we were going to be creating new apprenticeship spaces and new apprenticeship programs. But then, of course, 2020 hits, the world kind of shuts down, and we go into survival mode. So we had to pivot a bit, and what we ended up doing was working with entities that were already doing registered apprenticeships really well, and trainings really well. So I'm not going to go through all of the data, but you can see the participants served. The numbers in green were the metrics that we had to meet. The numbers in white are the ones that actually were the results. So this grant actually sunset in 2024, but you can see that we've surpassed in terms of the participants served. 5,000. We, served over 6,800 nationally in this space. Apprentices hired and enrolled, again, surpassed that. Employers engaged, which is, I'll talk about a little bit later, which is super, super important. But we far exceeded that. Average wage, going back to what Nicole was saying with why, right? The why is, our apprentices, now mind you, of course, it's in the IT space, well surpassed, the $16 an hour wage, and the wraps that were offered, and then partnerships. Tech Boost is the next one. So if we go into the next slide again, just a couple of stats. This was our second grant. We will be sunsetting this in the next couple of months. But again, so far to date, as of Q1 of this year, we've served well over the 800 that were in our metrics. The training completed, again, well over the 680 credentials earned. And when we talk about credentials earned, that's industry recognized credentials, specifically in the space of IT. So yeah, just some really great things to be proud of. And then the third one is Tech Build, which is the grant that we're currently working on. It's a little bit more strategic with regards to the industries in which we serve, but all again in the space of IT apprenticeship and work-based learning. And so here the participants served, we're working on the quality of participants. So about 400 participants that we need to serve. Actually, those numbers should be flipped, so my apologies. And we've already have 218 that we've served, and we've got about 4 more years of this grant. Training completed 45. Again, a lot of the apprenticeships, especially in the IT space, are a little bit longer. And so of course we're tracking those individuals, and then the credentials earned as well. Really cool thing is just on these maps, right? So we're national in terms of our scope in the world of apprenticeship in these IT occupations. And so with all of these 3 grants, we are expanding into 11 new states. With this last one, we'll be serving about over 40% of the United States population in this space. So just, proof in the data that it works, and it's really cool to be a part of it all.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. That's a great example of apprenticeships really filling those critical needs in IT and meeting those local needs of the economy. So, Amy, I know that the traditional trades face a different challenge with workforce shortages. How have you seen registered apprenticeship programs help employers in construction and other related industries?
Yeah, so I work a lot in the trades and in renewables, and that's renewable companies, what I'll be using for a case study to answer this question. SkyMass Energy, I run their apprenticeship program for wind technicians. And, everybody knows it's cheaper to retain your current workers than, hiring, recruiting costs. It's a high turnover industry, right? So we came in, laid out the program, designed it, implemented it. We're about a year and a half running, and retention has already improved. Everybody is seeing the quality of work improve. I personally know some of the apprentices in the program that were underemployed, mechanically inclined, underemployed, and now, a career in wind has been life-changing for them because they went through this apprenticeship program. And I do think it ensures accountability on all levels of the organization, right? If you have this, certified registered apprenticeship program, that means middle management is actually training the guys in the field. So it's just accountability everywhere. And another interesting thing we saw is the IRA projects in construction. They still come with the tax credits for now and the apprenticeship requirement with the DOL. And there's a lot of organizations and contractors and subcontractors that don't have apprenticeship programs. So actually it benefits our sales team as well, because they're able to sell, our quality labor and get more jobs, and we're seeing results and the customers are happy. So especially in the trades, that little piece with the IRA projects, but the ROI and the accountability and just the quality of training and the changing of lives for underemployed and unemployed individuals spans multiple industries.
That's awesome, Amy. So before we pass it over to an example from Bridget, let's hear from you all in the chat. So drop in the chat your biggest challenge your organization is facing right now, those kinds of local workforce needs. And feel free to add in any successful strategies that you've used to overcome the challenge as well, if you'd like. Definitely seeing some interest in the Clark program, which is awesome. Awesome. And as you all are kind of thinking on that one, I'll pass it over to Bridget to shift over now to think about healthcare a bit. So the shortages in healthcare we know are staggering. I'm wondering if you could paint a picture of the demand and supply gap and how apprenticeships really are making a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we all know, we encountered the thing called the pandemic not too long ago. Even before the pandemic, we knew that workforce shortages were coming to healthcare, and we had anticipated being somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 to 1 million healthcare workers short by 2025, which is the year that we're in. This was back pre-2020. Fast forward to the pandemic. A couple of things happened in the pandemic. Number one, it drove a lot of people out of the healthcare industry due to burnout, working around the clock, working in very tough situations with a lot of very, very sick people. Drove about a quarter of our healthcare workforce out of the industry early. The other thing that happened was people developed more chronic health conditions as a result of the pandemic, and continue to age as we have an aging population and more chronic healthcare conditions. So those workforce shortage projections for healthcare very quickly spiraled and doubled and tripled. And so now we're sitting in a situation where we're about 2 to 3 million healthcare workers short currently, and that is only expected to rise. So we at UW Health have chosen to invest in and pilot a number of innovative practices, implementing registered apprenticeship programs where we provide all of the training in-house, including the classroom education portion, and then partnering with our local college partners where we have occupations and professions that require a degree. And I think we looked really carefully at our most critical pain points. Some of those occupations were for medical assistants, pharmacy technicians, nursing assistants at the front end, but we're also very short nurses, respiratory therapists who were hit especially hard during the pandemic with all of the breathing issues. And then, of course, surgical technologists. So I think you could talk to any healthcare organization across the country, and they would also reflect that those are critical workforce shortages to them, for them as well. And so implementing apprenticeship, we launched our first registered apprenticeship back in 2018. If you want to go to the next slide, perfect. That was our medical assistant registered apprenticeship. Our latest one that we've launched was for the surgical technologist, which we just launched this fall. But we've trained over nearly 400 medical assistants since then. And these are the participants that you're seeing are per year. That's how many we're training in these various areas. The degreed registered apprenticeship programs for RN, it's an associate degree in nursing, and that's a 4-year program because it includes all of the prerequisite courses. We do know that for the average healthcare program, we get about 50% of students who drop out at the point of taking those rigorous science courses that are prerequisites for a lot of the degreed apprenticeship programs. And then we know in nursing programs and other clinical programs, we lose another 30% of students at the time that they start clinical rotations because they didn't do job shadowing or they didn't have any practical experience. And so they get into the clinical setting and it's just not what they expected it would be. So we've tried to address all of that with our building our registered apprenticeship programs. And fast forward to 2 months ago, I learned that we are now just keeping up with turnover for our medical assistants, nursing assistants, and pharmacy technicians, which are very much clinical entry points into healthcare. That's unusual for a healthcare system of our size, I think, to be keeping up only with turnover. Apprenticeship has opened up the possibility of training into careers for people who would have otherwise had a lot of challenges being a traditional student. So healthcare is very classroom heavy on the front end for our training programs and then very clinically heavy on the back end. We've always provided on-the-job training. It's just that we always expected historically that it would be free or you wouldn't be paid during that time. And so apprenticeship again opens up these careers and these training pathways to people who have to support families or support themselves while they're going to school. So it's made a huge difference. We have both a great quantitative and qualitative return on investment. We're retaining our apprentices who trained in our programs at a rate of about 22 to 23% higher than we retain those who we have hired from outside or did their training outside of our system. It's improved the culture in our departments. It's improved engagement. We've reduced turnover, we've reduced vacancy rates, and we've created happier and more engaged employees who now are looking for the next step in their career ladder. So apprenticeship has provided us all sorts of amazing returns on investment, and it's addressing our most critical workforce shortages.
Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. That's a really insightful perspective and really concrete examples. I've seen some things in the chat, right, about experience being a challenge for programs and things like pre-apprenticeships and kind of building up the pipeline and building up that workforce knowledge and experience might be beneficial for those partners. All right, so moving on here, we know that apprenticeships don't happen in isolation. They thrive when multiple partners work together in an ecosystem, and we're going to dig into how those roles connect. So again, before we pass it off to the panelists, we'd love to hear from you all, if you don't mind dropping in the chat the industry that you work in and what partners might be in your registered apprenticeship ecosystem. I've seen some healthcare apprenticeships mentioned earlier. Local Workforce Development Board, awesome. Multiple industries and different partners, great. Workforce Development Board, okay. So it sounds like we're spanning a lot of different industries, some healthcare, IT, education, fantastic. Awesome. All right, so it's great to see so many of us here from kind of across the board, and I'll turn it back over to our panelists, starting with Amy. So in your experience with registered apprenticeships, right, partners are really crucial. How do you see these roles supporting each other in practice?
Yeah, thanks. So I love this slide. This kind of like encompasses pretty much what I do is, connect different organizations to everybody else on this chart, right? At the center of everything in a registered apprenticeship, you've got your program sponsor. Sometimes that's employers, sometimes it's workforce boards, sometimes it's colleges. But basically, the sponsor is the one responsible for the DOL reporting, the audits, ensuring the program is compliant and actually running, and they're doing what they say that they are doing. I guess we can start at the top. Unions. I work a lot in the trades and renewals, especially with the unions and labor associations. Now they can be a bit cumbersome to navigate, and the apprenticeship has been in the trades a very long time. I'm very excited it's expanding to newer industries. But also these labor unions, because it's been in the trades, a lot of them have a blueprint written already for your work process schedule, for what you're training on the job, for all of these. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's out there. And usually a union, if you are working in the trades, will have some sort of paperwork, or if you're a smaller organization, they might already have a registered apprenticeship program that you can go under their sponsorship. External funders and philanthropy. This is great because apprenticeship does cost time and dollars, and it's an investment for the employers. And in my experience, that is the biggest hang up, right? But a lot of the work that I do, and I know Jen does as well, we demystify the process of apprenticeships. We're like, you're hiring and training anyways. But the funding, I connect, I'm actually partnering with Jen. I've been a training provider, partnered with her on some grant funding a few times. So I like to connect employers to that. But now that a lot of federal funding is kind of up in the air, there is apprenticeship funding that did go out this year, but external funders, the employers that see the long-term goals of apprenticeship and are willing to fund the expansion of these programs, they are crucial. But I will say, unfortunately, you got to do some work to find them and really advocate. And I'm glad there's a lot of advocates for apprenticeships on this call, because all the work we do together will just expand that resource. And apprenticeships is employer driven, but they're the hardest people to bring to the table sometimes. Been talking to employers for years and doing needs assessments, and their hangups are all over the place. But I think especially with higher education and workforce needing to come together, and this work that on apprenticeship degrees, these employers need to be working with educational institutions and workforce boards together. Higher education provider, they can be a related instruction provider, as well as private training partners there. And a lot of times they are the ones with government funding, so they can help offset the cost, or they'll have a curriculum already. I have done work with several state colleges writing articulation agreements for private training provider pre-apprenticeships. So that way, students who never thought they could afford college, they come out of a pre-apprenticeship program with some industry certifications and college credits. And that's something that I am also hoping is going to be expanded. Now, for me, the State Department kind of goes hand in hand with their SAA or OA state. Who in your state is governing the apprentice program? I was in Florida for 30 years. The Department of Education houses it there as an SAA state. I am now in Texas, an OA state. And so when you're starting your program, it's just good to kind of do some research, know what the format is, because OA states all use the same reporting system. SAA states use their own systems, and it adds to paperwork, and just seeking out help to navigate that process. That's another good thing about this slide. If you feel like apprenticeship is overwhelming, there is so much help out there. Every single circle on here of all of these partners, there's technical assistance from intermediaries. There's funding from intermediaries. They can just pick up the phone, answer a question. I'm having a problem with this. How do I do this with registration? I'm hitting a wall. There's so much resources out there. And then workforce boards oftentimes have a lot of funding. They I have worked with some that have apprenticeship specific funding for apprentices that are veterans. But, you know, that also comes with having the knowledge of how to fill out additional paperwork for grant reporting and things like that. So also something not on here, maybe grant writers. There's just all this whole ecosystem. I think we're all, again, working towards a common goal, and there's a ton of help out there and partnerships ready to work with any organization that has questions and is at any level of the apprenticeship process.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. So that's a really strong picture of kind of the ecosystem across industries and really appreciate your experience there. Bridget, we know healthcare has its own unique mix of players. So we have hospitals and training providers and workforce boards, nursing boards, etc. How do you see these roles overlapping and reinforcing each other?
Yeah, so there's a fair amount of landscape research that has to go into developing a healthcare apprenticeship because states license occupations and professions differently across all 50 states. So some occupations in healthcare are licensed in some states and not in others. Those licenses require credentialing. Credentialing usually requires that you graduate from a programmatically accredited healthcare program of study, which is different than our regional higher ed accrediting bodies. And so all of these things come together in a wonderful picture of a very regulated industry that we live in. So figuring out who regulates which parts and what's required for your state is always a good place to start. Fortunately, coming from a clinical healthcare background, I knew where to get a lot of the information that I needed in order to do these landscape research studies prior to suggesting or designing a program that would work for the current, regulatory requirements of that particular occupation. So in some cases, I mentioned we work and provide that training all in-house. And so we hold the accreditation for these programs that we provide in-house. The nice part about that is we're working directly with the accrediting agencies. So if we need to make changes that support either faster education or creating, for instance, we have an accelerated track for our medical assistant apprenticeship and a regular path. The accelerated track is for those that come in with a certain amount of patient care, direct patient care experience beforehand. And they can end up sitting for the board exam a little sooner than those that come in without that direct patient care experience. That's just one example, but doing that research on the front end. If you want to go to the next slide, we also have to work not only within the regulatory system, but we have an ecosystem that we've built in Dane County, which is one of the largest counties in our state, where we're working intentionally with our K-12 educators. We're working with other business and industry providers, leading the way as an employer champion to scale registered apprenticeship throughout different industries. We're also working with our intermediaries. Somebody mentioned workforce boards earlier. They've been a critical partner for us in identifying state and federal grant funding, and we've been very successful in writing for grants with those folks that support usually instructional fees and then sometimes wraparound supportive services costs for our apprentices. And then working with our higher ed partners, as I mentioned, anytime we have an occupation or profession that requires a degree, we've got to work with a higher ed partner to provide that degree. And then in that case, they're holding the accreditation for the program and making sure that they're in compliance with regulatory requirements. The other piece for healthcare is nursing programs. We have a nursing shortage across the country, but 80 to 90,000 qualified prospective nursing students are turned away from programs every year due to clinical capacity. So when we started work on that RN registered apprenticeship program, we knew we had to create additional clinical capacity with our local college partner. Building that capacity took building additional instructional facilities. We had to build a simulation center, and then we had to become accredited as a satellite instructional site for the college through ASIN, which is the National Programmatic Accrediting Agency for the Associate Degree Nursing Programs. So a lot of the pieces from that I had pulled early on from the landscape study came in very handy because we knew exactly what we would need to do and who we would need to appeal to and partner with in order to make sure that the program is well designed and set up for maximum apprentice success. So those are just some of the partners. I feel like we partner literally with everyone who's in the apprenticeship space across the state of Wisconsin at this point. But we're really proud to lead the way as an employer champion. And creating these intentional partnerships is critical to the success and the successful co-design of programs that are going to be maximally useful. And so I think some of our educational outcomes have been that 100% of our apprentices who complete programs become employed in the space that they've been training for. That's huge. And 98% of all of our apprentices who are completing a program that requires sitting for a board exam and earning a credential, they pass that credentialing exam on the first try. That's also really a really critical marker of educational success. So, but again, relying on intentional partnerships, continual communication between partners, lots of MOUs and agreements so that we all know what we're responsible for. And then lots of refining and working with our partners to adapt and change the programs, again, to provide maximum success for the apprentices.
Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. And so I know in IT, things look a little bit different again as our kind of industry spotlights. Jen, you've described apprenticeship partnerships as like a four-legged stool. So could you break down that analogy for us a bit?
Yeah, sure. And I might be jumping ahead of myself, but I love what Bridget said, just with regards to, there's so many shortages in the world, and how do we plug in to make sure that we're filling those gaps? And so a lot of the times when I go, I present at a lot of different conferences, and my big title is always like Back to the Future, because I think we all need to be reminded of the fact that apprenticeship was literally the first career that any human ever had, right? And so I love when people talk about student teaching, or I love when people talk about, even in the medical doctor world, right? When you do your residency, I know that we kind of call them different things, but a lot of this is an apprenticeship type of model, even to the point where, internships, a lot of people get internships and apprenticeships confused. An apprenticeship is a paid position for an employer. And so I'll go into my four-legged stool because I love the analogy. I think it's really simple to understand, but I just kind of wanted to preface it with that. And then after I do that, I'll let you guys know kind of just maybe some buzz little elevator pitch that everybody can be talking with employers about, because Amy mentioned it, and I've also seen in the chat that it is difficult to get employers at the table and to buy into this model. I think if we have the conversations more and more about how it literally is a sustainable plan and is something that has been happening for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe we can get a little bit more, buy-in from all entities. So my four-legged stool little analogy. Everybody's sitting on a chair, I'm guessing, with probably four legs, maybe three, but we'll just all say four, okay? And so in order for this system to work, you need all of these in balance. And so one, you need the employers, right? You need the employers that are willing and able and open to accepting apprentices in this newer model. A lot of the times people think, hey, you have to go and get your bachelor's degree and master's degree and doctorate degree, and then you can go into the world of work. There's more than one way to enter the world of work. And so those employers that are open-minded and are open to having different kind of avenues of accepting employees and retaining employees is super, super important. You also need those training partners, right? Sometimes those training partners are the employers themselves, but a lot of times they're workforce development boards, they're institutions of higher education, they're different training partners that offer these trainings to get the individuals the certifications that they need and the training to do the job. You need the apprentices. We also need to have conversations, with individuals. I have, two sons, and I'm having those conversations with them about, you don't necessarily have to do higher ed if that's not what you're wanting to do. There's different ways to learn. And I think, having those conversations starting young to let people know there's a lot of work-based learning that can be happening whether you go to college or not. And then the fourth leg is the funding. And so on my, in my team, that's kind of where we come in. At Clark, we have this grant money where you can braid it with other entities, with other workforce boards, with other WIOA funding, lots of different funding that you can braid to make this a very, very affordable option for individuals. So yeah, and again, it has to all kind of be in balance. If one's a little bit more prevalent than the other, well, I mean, and I hate to say it, but I let people know that if you're going and talking to employers and you're talking with the C-suite team and they're really not on board with the apprenticeship model, don't try to convince them. I have conversations with C-suite tables all the time and CEOs and trying to let them know, hey, you know what? Like, I'm not trying to sell you on something. It just actually works. So in the world of IT, in this particular space, a lot of people that have their master's degree in computer science are expecting to graduate and making $120,000, $140,000 a year. An employer has to spend that much money. If you do the apprenticeship model, you take somebody a little bit more green, maybe they don't have the degree, but you invest in them. That's, I think, why the retention rate is so high as well. You give them a job, you pay them maybe $75,000 a year, and then you contribute $15,000, let's say, to their training. And so you're investing them in multiple different ways, and you're teaching and training them the way that you as an employer want them to work. You're giving them the culture, you're really, allowing them to see what this all is. And versus 120, 140K plus benefits, you're maybe spending $100,000 and you're training up your pipeline of talent. So I give that example freely to anybody that's willing to listen, because like I said, I try not to sell people on apprenticeship, but that's a really clear example to know that it works and there's really advantages to it. So there you go.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. And I like the example you gave there at the end about really how the funding breakdown of things might work to make this feasible for employers. So before we shift topics now into how to actually build this crucial ecosystem, we'd love to hear a little bit more in the chat about which roles or partners it's most challenging for you all to create buy-in with as you are preparing or have prepared to launch your apprenticeship program. So you could type just the letter or the word, whether it feels comfortable. Employers, training providers, workforce agencies, other intermediaries, or other kinds of organizations. We've mentioned unions, other nonprofits or development organizations. So feel free to put that in the chat if you're comfortable. It does look like employers, and I did notice that, I think we were skewed more on the partner side and less on the employer side as far as participants of this session. So that's maybe an indicator as well of kind of the landscape of having ready partners looking to work with employers. Awesome. Some workforce agencies. Great. And if you've had any successes, feel free to share any tips that you've had as well. All right. So now that we understand a little bit more of the landscape of needs, particularly again, the employer connections, let's dive in a bit more into how to bring these partners on board and really keep them engaged and building your apprenticeship program. So we know that building partnerships aren't always straightforward, but that's really where these programs either succeed or unfortunately can fall off. So we're going to want to hear a little bit more about what's worked in your sectors. And Bridget, I know you've been doing this work for years with UW Health. Could you share how you built buy-in early on and how you sustain those partnerships over time?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm frequently in these apprenticeship conversations where the employer tends to be the biggest challenge. I will say that going to my C-suite to make the case for the first registered apprenticeship program was a huge challenge. In fact, I went back 3 years in a row after being told no for the first 2 years. What ended up allowing me, I guess, the time and space to create our first apprenticeship program was the fact that I came back with a $500,000 state grant. That would help fund that medical assistant registered apprenticeship for the first 2 years. That was critical because I didn't have any demonstrated success path before that, but that 2 years bought us time to say, you know what, this works. And the other thing that I had to appeal to was we have a massive supply versus demand issue. So laying that out for employers was super helpful in getting my C-suite to buy in to make the decision to allow me to provide them with, early ROI or outcomes from that first program. I would say our supply versus demand issue was painted because we understood our local technical college branch was producing about 30 graduates from their medical assistant program, and we have 3 large healthcare employers hiring about 300 medical assistants just in the Madison area alone. So that picture had to be painted for the C-suite because that's not something they're paying attention to. And generally, HR practices just say, well, we put more and more money into trying to recruit. You cannot recruit people who don't exist. So that was a critical piece of the buy-in as well. I think as we've gone along and established additional programs, I've been able to demonstrate really well that, again, the quantitative and qualitative ROI for this, but then also taking on the role of employer champion to help other employers understand their supply versus demand mismatch. And then bottom line is for an apprenticeship, you're paying someone at a lesser rate than you would pay a fully credentialed person, as Jen just laid out. And so you're actually saving money and you're not having to include or engage in premium pay practices similar to sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses, all of those things that we were doing to try and pay people more. But again, you cannot pay people who don't exist. So we've been able to do away with all premium pay practices for those medical assistants, pharmacy techs, and nursing assistants, which is huge, millions of dollars in cost savings. And we've been able to not have to hire agency staff. Agency staff cost about 3 to 4 times as much as a regular person that you would hire with the credentials and training. So all of those things I think are very appealing to C-suite folks who ultimately have to make the decision to say, yes, we'll provide operational dollars to support these programs.
Thank you for sharing, and what great perspective it is to have that you've actually gone in front of your C-suite and kind of made these cases. Great. So Jen, in IT, partnerships we know often look different. So in our prior conversations, you've mentioned that really intentional relationship building. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. So, in the grant world, when the grant goes away, you go away too. So, myself and my team work very, very hard to make sure that we are building intentional relationships and sustainable relationships. So like I said, I was born and raised in Buffalo, and when my parents asked me, like, hey, what are you doing these days? It's really difficult to kind of explain the job. It's not just one word, it's not just one title, right? And so, like I said, in my intro, that I'm an intentional relationship builder and project manager. And in those relationship building processes, if you will, it is, we go to conferences, we make sure that we say, hey, Amy, who is a training provider, and company, SkyMast, who she works with as an employer, hey, why don't you guys talk, get along, and maybe SkyMast can work with Amy in doing the training, and then they build this partnership, and we provide the funding to get them started. Just like Bridget said, you have to have that funding to get started, but then when that grant money and that funding goes away, we go away too. But then Amy and SkyMast are still partners, and hey, it works, and that's fantastic. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. Another thing in terms of just, going back into higher education. I love higher ed. I worked in higher ed for 10 plus years. I was a faculty member, professor. And I think what's really interesting in that space too, talking about these partnerships, is we have to rethink the way that we're interacting with the world. And we have to rethink the way that we say things. So when I was in higher ed, which wasn't too long ago, I think I left in 2017, our big thing was, hey, our students are our audience. And I think we need to rephrase that again in building these partnerships. The employers are our audience and the students are our product. And so even in the world of apprenticeship, that same thing is clear. We need to have this starting with the employers to say, what is it that you need, so that we can make sure that we're training up the individuals that you want to get them the jobs and get them the on-the-job placement and all of that. And that's what I love, with what Craft is doing. They've done this in the teacher apprenticeship space. So instead, of the traditional student teacher type of process, they're doing it in a really kind of neat space where you're working in this apprenticeship degree area, if you will, with taking these paraprofessionals and getting them into the space of teaching while doing an apprenticeship type model. So just some, really clear examples of what's been working in some ways that we've been able to do some partnerships. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Amy, I know you very excitedly talked about developing what you call a partnership playbook. So could you walk us through your approach and what's been most successful in getting those stakeholders on board?
For sure. Yeah, I get asked all the time, how do you know about these things? How did you even start learning about apprenticeship? And honestly, I started by attending webinars like this and going to conferences and just kind of meeting more and more people in the ecosystem. But I wanted something that was like a tool I can refer to, because when I'm working with organizations, all their needs are different, right? So the partnership playbook, it's just like a framework for building, maintaining, and scaling apprenticeship programs. And it can work in any industry. But the first thing, you start with the why. Why are they here for an apprenticeship program? Is it because a compliance, like, is it forced on them by a regulation? Or is it something they're interested in? Do they want to increase retention? Do they want to use it for hiring purposes? They don't know. So determining that, I always want to know why they are interested in this space first, and then mapping the right partners. Going back to that slide we had before, are you working with a local workforce board? Who's doing your related instruction? Mapping all of that out and building the buy-in early, especially with the people that are going to be doing the mentoring and the training at the, of the actual apprentices, because that's where a lot of these programs drop off. So getting your champions for the program together. What's everyone's role? What's that going to look like? Design clarity and accountability. And then a plan to sustain and scale. Like Jen mentioned, the grant funding is not forever. So what are you doing as an employer, as somebody running a program, to make sure that your program is sustainable beyond, a performance period of a grant? And then I like to provide tools and templates, readiness checklist, your needs assessment, communication cadence. Do we want feedback loops every 30, 60, 90 days? At what level? Who's going to be doing the reporting? Again, and Bridget mentioned lots of MOUs. So everybody is transparent. Everybody knows their roles, and, whatever else, whatever the resources they need. And I find that, it's high level that can work with any size organization, any interest, any of their needs, to kind of build and scale programs through partnerships.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. And thanks to all the panelists for providing some incredible examples across multiple industries and spotlighting your work in IT and healthcare. So I know we're approaching the top of the hour, but we do have until, 4:15 Eastern with some questions, for some time for some questions and wrap up. If you're able to hang on, if not, like we said, we'll send out the recording afterwards and make sure any unanswered questions are answered in subsequent communications. But for now, we'd love to take any questions that you do have, either drop them in the chat or in the Q&A box. We did have one in the Q&A as we went along that I'll read right now. And if any more pop in as we go along, I'll read those out as well. So the first is, how do you address or overcome the training provider bottleneck, such as not having enough instructors, the capacity for apprentice cohort classes in community colleges, career tech centers, and for-profit or nonprofits? I find one of the biggest barriers next to getting employers to give the registered apprenticeships a try is finding a training provider that has the capacity and willingness to be an RTI provider. Are any of our panelists interested in taking a stab at that one?
I can jump in and say that we as the employer have had to be the RTI as well. And so I think that's always a consideration. And again, I know healthcare is very complex and highly regulated. However, if we have people that can support related technical instruction, we will hire them as part of what we agree to do as the employer in this space. I think I also talked about the example of working with our college and the RN program. We knew we had to create additional clinical capacity. That also meant that we hired faculty on our side of the house who can act as preceptors when it comes time for those clinical rotations. That's the other piece that colleges struggle with, especially in the healthcare space, is identifying enough faculty or enough preceptors to work with students. So we knew that was something we had to step up and do as well. And we have had grant funding, but usually grant funding buys us time to get our outcomes. Once I'm able to provide really strong outcomes, then that means UW Health will usually adopt and support and sustain these programs using operational funds.
Fantastic. Awesome.
Yeah, and real quick, I'll, chime in just with regards to what I said when we first started. The Tech Quest apprenticeship program with the first grant, and then COVID hit, and it was, oh, I thought that we were going to be able to kind of develop and design and create new apprenticeship programs, but there's a lot of partners in all around the US that are doing apprenticeships, and they're doing them really, really well in the IT space. So I know, I think Chloe linked some of the links to all three of our grants. All three of them have different web pages. You can go to the partner page. You can take a look at those partners that we have partnered with to deliver the RTI, and then talk with them about possibly doing those partnerships. And then, even what Amy was saying, the number one starting place is to see if your state is an OA state or an SAA state, and then see the regulations. And then, to what Bridget was saying, as the employer, yes, you can do your own, but then is it worth the investment, or is it better to partner with somebody else? So, I mean, lots of different things to take into consideration. And I know that this is just a webinar, but I know that myself, Amy, and Bridget, I'm sure Nicole, same, we're happy to have further conversations if need be about the dynamics and, what you all want to do in the world of apprenticeship.
Thank you. So another question from the chat. Have you experienced, and if so, how did you navigate lots of different groups in the ecosystem wanting to own employer engagement, leading to lots of different groups tapping employers and sometimes overexhausting them? Amy, I saw you come off mute. We want to take a look at this one.
Sure. Yeah, I think, everybody, again, in the apprenticeship ecosystem, we know that the employers are the ones, that drive this. I have come across organizations that, have had funding, and they still can't get employers on board, and they think it's too much work and it's too much paperwork, and then they just don't want to hear about it. The HR department doesn't want to do any of the admin work and all that stuff there. But I think it's speaking to them in a language that they understand. Demystifying is a word that I always use again for this, and with the approach of, hey, here's the information, here's resources, if this comes up, and again, going back to what their needs are, because if there's organizations out there that might have funding that might need to spend it, and everybody wants funding, right? But they might be pressuring these employers to, set up these programs with training providers that might not be providing quality work just so they can get a cut of the grant money. And so you really have to do some due diligence, and research what partners you're working with, and, why are they interested? Do they really want to promote quality programs? They just trying to get paid from another organization's interest? Because it can be a lot. So it's really just kind of, navigating the space and just providing resources where available, and speaking to them in a way that they understand. I always say, like, you're already hiring and training these employees. This just, formalizing your training program ensures accountability, ensures quality in your organization. Yes, there might be a few new nuances, but the long-term investment is worth it. Instead of, we'll wave these dollars in front of you, again, it can be exhausting for especially the employers. And I think that's a reason it's so hard to bring them to the table a lot of times.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your invaluable time and expertise with us today. We really appreciate you. And to all of the participants, thank you again for joining our session today. When you leave, there's going to be a quick survey that'll pop out on your screen at the close of the call. And so we'd appreciate it if you could fill it out to make sure future webinar sessions best meet your needs. So we'll look forward to sharing the recording with you in a follow-up email, and you can, of course, reach out if you have any other questions for our experts at Craft or any of our panelists. And we hope to see you again at one of our future monthly sessions from now through April 2026. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day.